We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
When I was about 18, I spent Christmas break visiting my family in Mumbai, then Bombay, India. One night, my cousins and I went clubbing at the Taj Hotel. I distinctly recall the details, in part because I didn't booze at the time and because it is still etched in my mind like it was yesterday. The driver dropped me at Grand Paradis at my aunt's bungalow, where I'd been staying with my cousin and my younger sister, who were awake when I got back home. It was late, but they wanted the details of the night, so I indulged. My aunt bellowed from the room above, telling us to quiet down and go to bed, so naturally we continued to whisper and giggled ourselves to sleep. At some point in the early morning, something woke me. I turned and looked towards the closet and saw a young woman standing in a pale yellow-colored sari near the window by the bathroom. I gasped. She stood for a few seconds and then moved towards the bathroom. It took me a few minutes to switch on the light. Slowly, I walked towards the closet, then peered into the bathroom. She was gone. I was numb. I laid back down on the bed, but my heart was pounding so hard that it felt like the bed was shaking. I woke my cousin and my sister up to tell them what I'd seen. Like any normal person awakened in the middle of the night, they said, "Yes, yes, yes, we believe you," enough finally for me to fall asleep. The next day at breakfast, many of the servants had heard about my mysterious sighting. I thought for sure they would think I was nuts, but instead they weren't surprised. It turned out that there were similar stories like mine. They called these aberrations unsettled souls. I later learned that there was an area behind this complex where a Parsi group cremated members of their community. It seems that they'd had some type of gigantic barrel like vat where they would perform such ceremonies. It must have been a somewhat illegal ceremony, I'm not too sure. I do recall that it smelled odd, and I could see and smell smoke rising from my friend's flat. My cousin later told me that the servants had told her that they had seen many ghosts. They would sometimes sit in the stairwells of the high-rises with cab drivers and other laborers smoking and sharing stories. One said that he'd seen a woman who'd fallen to her death from the 21st floor. Her ghost would pass by every night at the same time. I used to rent a room in North Berkeley. The house is just a couple of blocks from Martin Luther King Middle School. It was built in 1925. My landlady and her family lived there for 20 years and had paranormal experiences, so they all knew it was haunted. I never saw any spirit directly, but I did experience some things. During the first week I moved in, my landlady's Chihuahua puppy started barking at the old piano in the living room. It was in the evening, so everyone was home. We had 2 dogs in the house, so everyone ignored the puppy because the other dog was chilled out. However, the puppy wouldn't move away from the piano, and the barking persisted for another half-hour. Eventually, my landlady lost her patience, grabbed a bottle of holy water she had gotten from a nearby Catholic church, and sprinkled it at the piano. It was only then that the puppy moved away and stopped. Once, during August, my landlady woke me up at 2 a.m. She was sleeping in the living room and heard distinct knocks coming from the bathroom. I checked it out with the dogs and I didn't see anything. The dogs also didn't show any strange reaction. I sat with the landlady in the living room and indeed, we both heard knocking on the ceramic surface, either the bathtub or the bathroom sink. It was 2 quick knocks each time, followed by a pause for a few minutes, then 2 quick knocks again. The sound persisted for about 2 hours until it stopped around 4 a.m. My landlady consulted some Catholic priests the next day, and they said The entity that did the knocking was not malicious, but it was also something we wouldn't want in the house. A few days after the bathroom incident, I was chatting with my landlady in the living room. It was early evening. We were sitting on a 3-seater couch with the middle seat empty. Suddenly, an unfamiliar ringtone rang loudly between us. I had an iPhone with the default ringtone setting, and it was placed far away from the living room, so I knew it couldn't be my cell phone. My landlady also had her cell phone, with a different ringtone from the one we heard, placed somewhere else. We started flipping the couch seats and checking underneath to see if anyone had dropped their phone, but we couldn't find anything. The ringtone happened just once, and we never heard it again. Even though we couldn't find the source, my landlady said it inexplicably made her think of her grandmother for the rest of the evening. When my landlady first moved in 2 decades ago, they had installed motion sensors because of their children. They were very young at the time, but the motion sensors would trigger constantly in the middle of the night. After a few months, my landlady asked the Catholic priest to exorcise her house. The priest said it was the spirit of a young boy who used to live there. My landlady and her ex would constantly get into heated arguments during their marriage. Once, after an argument, the ex-husband stormed into one of the kids' rooms to cool down. As he lied face down on the bed, he suddenly felt someone was staring at him. He turned around and saw a translucent old lady in 1930s style dress staring angrily at him with her arms crossed. According to the landlady and her kids, the old lady would subsequently appear before the ex-husband when he upset the family. When I was a freshman in high school, my grandmother died, and we moved in with my grandfather to take care of him. At this point, my father had left and my brother had joined the Air Force. My mother, my sister, and I moved in. This was a 100-year-old farmhouse my grandparents had bought when my mother was about 10 years old. My mother was the second youngest of 7 kids, and I'm number 26 of 27 grandchildren. And everyone thought of the farmhouse as home. It was an amazing place to play as a child, with the woods in the backyard and several outbuildings to play in. But there was always a mildly creepy feeling. Everyone on the street assumed it was haunted, and they weren't wrong. When my grandparents were both alive, there were so many people coming and going every day, I don't think we noticed some of the energies hanging around. Once we moved in, though, we noticed little things like small gray shadows you would see out of the corner of your eyes, unintelligible whispers, and things that went missing. There was nothing particularly scary. We became aware that the previous owner was still there. My mother could sense her and even saw her a few times. She was very sweet, and I think she enjoyed our energy. She would sit in the corner during the holidays and just watch us. Her husband, however, was a real bastard. When he died, she had had every tree around the house cut down to spite him, and I always thought that was funny. Her name was Amy. She died in the dining room of the house. At some point, my mother, my sister, and myself helped her move on out of the house and not be bound to it anymore. After we did that, we noticed more activity in the house, and the house became a little more frightening. I do believe there were many entities there. There was kind of an oppressive feeling to the house. I always associated that with Amy's husband. There were many nights I would get into bed and everything would seem normal. Then something would wake me up. I would have an intense fear, and it felt as if there were a group of people surrounding my bed. I would be terrified, too afraid to move or look. This became a common occurrence. I was pretty sure these quote-unquote people were coming from my closet. I told my mother I thought there was an energy vortex in my closet. When I was about 15, I went into the living room. As I was walking, I was thinking, why am I going in here? I don't want to watch TV. It felt like I was being summoned. I immediately became aware there was something standing to my left by the window. I looked over, and there was a shadow person standing there. He was about 6 feet tall and gray, but also see-through. I felt like I was in a trance. Suddenly the trance lifted and I became very afraid, and I launched myself off of the couch and ran through 3 rooms to get to my mother. I ended up nose to nose with her in the bathroom. She said, "Yes?" I said in a very high-pitched voice, "There's someone in the living room." She knew exactly what I meant. When we went in, he was, of course, gone. There were many nights when I would be home alone, and the house just felt awful, and noises would start happening. I would just grab a drink and a snack and the phone and sit on the porch until someone came home. In 1994, my mother sold the house to one of my older cousins. That cousin moved out last year. She said when she was home alone, she would hear her name being called, and she saw apparitions all over the house. As scary as that house could be at times, and even oppressive, I miss it. I do have wonderful and terrible memories. My mother's mother is from a reservation in South Dakota, and they lived there briefly. I did too when I was young. At least one Bigfoot is up there for sure. My mother actually saw one with her brother while they were walking their dog when she was a young girl. The dog went crazy. My family's land is in the middle of nowhere. No one could have been around. And yet, we heard something banging on the trees, pounding on them. We had 4 dogs, and they all started barking and going crazy. My stepdad got concerned and let them loose. They all took off in the same direction. Eventually, they came back. They didn't find anything. The following day, my stepdad found tracks in the snow. Huge steps. There's no way it could have been made by a person. And there's no way someone would have been out there in the middle of nowhere. It looked like the Bigfoot came walking towards our house, but stayed at an obvious distance. Bigfoots make a noise unlike any noise you've ever heard. It sounds like an animal, but it doesn't sound like anything familiar. And you'll never forget it once you hear it. This story I have to share is something that my late mother-in-law experienced. A girl who was like a sister to her had passed away. My mother-in-law was ill and unable to make it to Marguerite's funeral. The night of the funeral, she was awakened, and there was Marguerite sitting at the foot of the bed, all dressed up in a lovely pink dress and sporting a beautiful brooch. They spoke a few words, and my mother-in-law, being the practical person she was, thought, I must be dreaming. So she got up and went to the bathroom. When she came back, Marguerite was still sitting on the bed. They spoke for quite a while, and the next day, my mother-in-law called Marguerite's family to share the story of Marguerite's visit. And when she described what Marguerite was wearing, there was silence on the other end of the phone. And then she was told what she had described, the beautiful pink dress and the brooch, was what Marguerite had been wearing in her coffin. Special thanks to Jacinta Higgins, our main sponsor for this program.